Hello class, my name is Billy Fifield, and today we will be discussing freedom of speech. So what is the freedom of speech? Well, the freedom of speech is a part of the First Amendment and is the first right in the Bill of Rights. It allows for an open expression to freely voice political opinions and criticize government actions or policies. Without this, the democratic form of the government cannot even exist. Uh, there are different types of speech, like symbolic speech, and according to the Fundamentals of Business Law Today by Roger Leroy Miller, symbolic speech includes gestures, movements, articles of clothing, and other forms of expressive conduct. An example of this would be wearing a shirt with certain political ideas or expressions in the form of tattoos. The next form of freedom of speech is corporate political. So corporate political speech is very similar in the personal level in that gives a freedom of speech at the corporate level. An example would be in 2010 when the U.S. Supreme Court made it legal for corporations to sprint freely to support or oppose candidates for president or Congress. This lines up with corporate political speech. The final form of freedom of speech is commercial speech. This consists of communications, primarily advertising and marketing, made by business firms that involve only their commercial interests. An example of this is Bad Frog Brewery Incorporated versus New York State Authority. What Bad Frog Brewery wanted to do was to have a picture of a frog giving the middle finger on their beer bottles, and at first this was alleged to be offensive. However, they found that this was actually a part of the First Amendment, and the initial ruling violated their right to freedom of speech, so it was overturned in favor of Bad Frog Brewery. So let's take a look at some historical court cases. So the first court case that I could find were actually two in 1919. A lot of these were because of wartime restrictions. In this case, particularly World War One. This one is Schenck versus the United States, and the next one later in 1942 was Chaplinsky versus New Hampshire. So Schenck versus the United States happened just after World War One. It was at the tail end of World War One. Socialists Charles Schenck and Elizabeth Bayer distributed leaflets declaring that the draft violated the 13th Amendment prohibition against involuntary servitude. The leaflets urged the public to disobey the draft. Since it was disobeying the draft, what they found to be violating of was the Espionage Act of 1917 by attempting to cause insubordination in the military and obstruct recruitment. So Schenck and Bayer appealed the statute, saying that it violated their First Amendment and the freedom of speech. The court ruled in favor that, in fact, the espionage did not violate the First Amendment and was the appropriate exercise of Congress during for wartime authority. So that's where we see wartime restrictions come into play as for the freedom of speech. The court compared the leaflets to shouting fire in a crowded theater, which is obviously not permitted under the First Amendment. Another case that was very similar to this happened in 1919 as well, was Debs versus the United States. Eugene Debs delivered a public speech to his audience to interfere with military recruitment. They actually used Schenck versus the United States in their findings in saying that it in fact also violated the Espionage Act of 1917. So the next case is Chaplinsky versus New Hampshire, 1942. This took place in 1942. Walter Chaplinsky went on a public sidewalk in downtown Rochester and distributed literature that supported his beliefs as a Jehovah's Witness. He also attacked more conventional forms of religion And he also used slander against the town marshal by calling him names and a fascist. He was arrested and convicted under a state law that prohibits intentionally offensive and annoying speech to any person who is lawfully in a street or public area. Chaplinsky obviously fought this, saying that it violated his freedom of speech. However, the court found that his words were fighting words, and they upheld their decision. So there's another restriction of the freedom of speech. In this case, they found it to be fighting words, which he couldn't do in a public setting. So if we go to more current cases, we see how the freedom of speech has evolved, and it actually opened up more areas, such as the freedom of expression. It brought on new meanings. The freedom of expression became adopted in 1948 under Article 19 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. There have been change and freedom of speech in facing more trials today than ever, like the next two cases that we're going to talk about, which is Masterpiece Cake Shop versus Colorado Civil Rights Commission and Minnesota Voters Alliance versus Mansky. So in this case, Masterpiece Cake Shop took place in 2012. The owner of the cake shop was in Lakewood, Colorado, and refused to design and create a cake for same-sex wedding of Charles Craig and David Mullins. The administrative law judge issued a written order in favor of Craig and Mullins, saying that it was a discrimination based on sexual orientation, which is protected under the Colorado Anti-Discrimination Act. The court, however, reversed the case with a 7-2 decision in favor of Masterpiece Cake Shop, for they found that it forced the Masterpiece Cake Shop to design a cake that violated the free exercise clause, since it would go against his religious beliefs. In the next case, Minnesota Voters Alliance versus Mansky, this happened just last year in 2018. Minnesota statute prohibits individuals from wearing political apparel at or around polling places on primary or election days. Andrew Silic, an executive director for the Minnesota Voters Alliance, was temporarily prevented from voting because he was wearing a t-shirt with a Tea Party logo. The court found in favor of the Minnesota Voters Alliance, however, in a 7-2 decision, stating that the statute violated the freedom of free speech clause of the First Amendment. So why is freedom of speech important? Well, first, it's a part of the First Amendment, which is of the Bill of Rights. It allows us to stand up for our beliefs and gives us voice. This is something that this country was founded on, and it's very unique among the world today. It is what makes the United States who they are, as there's not many other countries with this type of freedom to speech that we have. So it's very important. And honestly, this is what has intrigued me with so many cases today. And our country is really unlike any others. So I thought freedom of speech was really intriguing. So yeah, thank you for viewing my presentation. And here are the references. And I hope you have a nice day. Thank you.